Hello, Data Standard community. I'm your host, Shayna Weldon, and this is the Data Standard audio experience. Today on our podcast, we are bringing you Zach Frank, a director of people analytics and artificial intelligence at Aramark. Zach helps design integral global reporting and analytics systems for complex HR organizations. Wow, welcome to the show, Zach.
Thanks, Shane. I'm glad to be here.
I'm so happy that you're here with us today. To start off, can you please just introduce yourself?
Yeah, so as you said, my name is Zach. I oversee people analytics and artificial intelligence at Aramark. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and have for basically all of my life, and have a lovely little family of recently 4. I've got an almost 8-week-old son, in addition to my 5-year-old daughter. So it's crazy times.
That's also so exciting though. Oh my
It
goodness.
is. Yep. Yep.
So what was your career journey in getting to where you are today?
Yeah, so it started bumpily and poorly, I would say. My first opportunity for doing anything with analytics was I took an Excel course in college and just barely passed. Not because I was bad at it, because I just didn't do the assignments. I didn't care about Excel at the time. And so later, when I got out of school, I ended up going into volunteer management with nonprofits. And then later I took my first private sector job and I needed to use Excel and discovered that I actually loved it. And so I always kind of look back at that time in college and kick myself for the wasted opportunity of like, oh, I could have gotten such a good head start if I would have only known. But so that's how it started. And then with that job, that first private sector job that I took, I was working for a kind of small sub-regional logistics company. It served the state of Tennessee and a couple surrounding states, and discovered that a part of my job was to call drivers who were delivering big truck parts and tractor parts overnight and call them and ask, hey, when did you reach this dealer? Okay, did you have all your freight? And then do that for all of their stops the whole way long. I mean, it took me most of the day on my first day, and I didn't want any part of that. So I set up this automated reporting system to use these scanners that the drivers had to automatically send the times, and then we could record the times and do all these statistics and analysis off of it. And that just started kind of my love affair with like, oh, we can automate things, we can produce numbers, we can get meaning out of them, and then improve our systems with that. And so then that just kind of spiraled. After doing a couple years in logistics data, I moved over to healthcare data and also some operations data, call center and shared services for a healthcare organization. Also a little bit of website and mobile app. And then a couple of years ago, moved over into HR data, which has been its own wonderful adventure.
Wow. I like how you saw an issue and you took it in your own hands to fix it and find a solution.
It's applied laziness. I mean, you hear people talk about it all the time, but I was going to work however hard it took to not have to do this work that I didn't like and didn't want to do. So yeah, I applied my will for laziness and created a better solution.
That's also a way to look at it. So moving towards your current role though, what do you do as a director of people analytics and AI?
I ask a lot of questions so that I can help answer other people's questions about people. I guess that's one way of kind of saying what it is.
It's like a brain teaser.
Yeah, right. I didn't mean for it to be quite such a tongue twister. But I mean, really, it's about how do we improve decision making and experience for employees and candidates, right? How do we, and they're not really separate elements in terms of how do we look at and understand our workforce using data? And then as a not completely separate part of my job, then how do we use artificial intelligence tools to help better that experience that they have, and in some cases also improve that decision making, because there are definitely tools that can do that as well. But that's really what the core of the work is about. And then obviously there's all the ones and zeros, or nuts and bolts of it, which is, these meetings and conversations and the coordination and defining and kind of all those things. But at its core, it's really about improving decision making and experience around a company's workforce.
Is there a common question that you ask or get asked?
What do you want to change? That's there's no right set of metrics for people analytics. There are some common core areas, right? So every organization is interested in recruiting and talent acquisition. Every organization is interested in retention. And then every organization is to some extent interested in a subset of retention, which is performance management, just kind of knowing how we're doing, right? Everybody's concerned about kind of those big three categories. But then, for what exactly do you look at? What metrics do you use? How do you look at them? It's really just that most important question of what is it that you want to do? Because there is no exactly right metric. There are definitely some wrong ones, but the metric should really be an answer to a conversation of, all right, what does the company want to achieve? What does it need to change with its workforce, with its people?
Got it. So in the workspace, what is the importance of correctly sizing teams? And is there a good size or the most efficient size for an analytical team?
Efficient? No. For me, efficiency is really about the processes. Like, you can be inefficient with you can be more inefficient with one person than you can with 12, and obviously vice versa as well. But I think that question of size, I think it's important, but not necessarily critical. And some of what goes into that for me is I think people generally approach this question for one of two reasons. One, your team is overwhelmed and you're wondering if it's just you, and like, how big should we be? I'm freaking out. I've got all this work to do. And then the second scenario is you're designing or redesigning a team. You're considering that structure, the future of work, and you want to know, okay, I have an opportunity to set this up. Am I doing it right? So for that first group who you're overwhelmed and just wondering if you're crazy, probably not. I guess it's possible that you're just doing a really bad job at delivering products and kind of getting things out, but probably not. It probably should be bigger. And I think while you lobby for those resources, just try to get better about setting boundaries and being transparent about the work process so that you're not covering up the warts of what it takes to do the work. For the second part, the only thing that I've seen that approaches a short answer is I've seen in a couple places people say 3 to 7%. I would say that if you're going to go for just a quick grab answer, 5 to 8% is probably more accurate. But that's a big gap, and I think there are a lot of dependencies. Really, it really depends. But I've been fortunate enough to feel like I've discovered a set of questions that you can walk through to help figure out, all right, am I on the right track? Am I getting close? It won't tell you exactly how many people, but it'll at least get you thinking about the right things to see if you've diagnosed that for yourself correctly.
Okay. So when we talk about the end user, how can you be proactive and add value to them? And what are some systematic approaches that you can take?
Yeah, so kind of similar to before, it depends very much on your situation. I think the biggest thing about going proactive is deciding that you're going to do it, right? That's just making that switch of, oh, we're not just going to fill the requests that come to us, and we're not just going to be responsive to that. We are going to look for opportunities and take charge of the story of how we tell data stories in the organization. So for us, a few things that have been helpful is one is give more than what is asked. So if somebody asks for a basic data dump, or even just a set of numbers for, we'll get this one a lot with a request for proposal, RFP responses, and they'll say something like, all right, what was your internal versus external hiring rate, right? And you could just give those numbers over and say, oh, here they are. So what we try to do is, okay, if you're going to give something like that over, give them something else. And for instance, like that, it could be, oh, well, here's what it was for last year, but that trend has increased over the last 3 years. So we want to give some sort of additional piece of information that would answer an unasked follow-up question. I think another thing you can do is talk directly to your audiences. Make sure that you're interfacing with the people who are actually using your insights, so that you're not kind of interfacing with another layer that's missing that translation. And then lastly, don't be afraid to push back on ownership. Part of being proactive is making sure you stake out your territory really well. One of the things that we run into in the HR space is you can run into a lack of clarity about what is communication and what is reporting or an insight. And so that's an area where we have to be really careful about saying, hey, we can provide the data, we can help you make sense of the data, we can talk to you about trends, we can try to provide broader market context and a lot of those things. But if somebody's asking about a situation at a specific account, there's got to be a conversation that takes place about, okay, our insights feed into your communication to your stakeholders about what's going on.
Okay. You mentioned HR. What is HR analytics and how is it different from other analytics? What's your take?
Yeah, in some ways it's not. At its basics, people analytics, HR analytics is about using data to help inform people and policy decisions, right? Obviously, specifically people-related policy decisions, again, with the tongue twisting. So in terms of what's different, everything is protected information. Like when you're working with people analytics, there's no piece of information that you're touching that doesn't have some kind of protected data that goes along with it. So you've always got to have that track kind of playing in your mind. You're never dealing with an obscured or de-identified set or something like that. I think in some ways it's easier than other types of data that I've worked in. Your demand complexity is typically it's not necessarily lower, it has a gentler curve. So a lot of your people organizations are going to be starting at a lower point on an analytics maturity scale, and they're going to more slowly ramp up into more complex demand. I think another thing is, there's kind of a natural meaning to people analytics work. You don't have to ask about the soul of what you're doing. You're trying to improve people's working conditions, and people spend a lot of time at work. So there's a lot of good inherent value. It's also really easily transferable. Yes, there can be differences, but people analytics at one organization is going to be more similar to people analytics at another organization versus industrial control system analytics versus call center analytics or something like that. So I think those are some things. I think some things that make it harder are the tech is always hard. I should say almost always hard. There are a couple of organizations that have really good integrated HR tech stacks, but then you also walk into places like a previous employer of mine. When I started, we had 90 different instances of HR software in the United States alone. And when I say I should say HR systems, not software, because some of these were, Post-it notes getting typed into Excel, right? Like it was a very generous definition for a system. So the tech is always hard. Your literacy tends to be pretty low in terms of your audiences. And then just back to that lack of clarity and kind of the intermixing of what's a communication and what's an insight, because this is such, every case matters, right? So it's not just the statistics of how many investigations you're doing, but also what's going on with this one particular important investigation. So there's always kind of this two-stage handoff of internal stakeholders to add context to external stakeholders.
Do you have an example of a data set that you work with?
Yeah, so I mean, one that we do pretty routinely is candidate information. And even that that's kind of going back to the tech question. Almost every element of HR data sets can be broken down into smaller and smaller sets. So I can even talk about candidates, right? Well, there is the records of the candidates as a user in our systems. There's specific applications and how those applications are applied to jobs. there's their background check information, their offer information. So it's even your most, relatively simple data set has all these sub schemas and data sets that go along with it, that it's a never ending onion of fun.
I see. Never ending onion of fun.
Yeah,
Like
that's
that.
not one I'm going to coin, I don't think.
So, do you use AI in your work? Like, have you incorporated AI or machine learning into what you're doing?
Yeah, AI more so than machine learning, and I think probably one of the things that I'd say as a big point of understanding for how we use AI is that we are very much a vendor-led AI organization. So our focus is much more on integration and oversight for AI, and I think some of the reasons for that are that AI in HR is fraught with difficulty. And so I would say that unless AI is something that your organization does well in another part as part of its kind of natural operating of business, HR is a very difficult place to launch into it, right? Even if you're doing it in other parts of centralized functions. A couple of the reasons. Typically, you don't have a lot of the talent to do it. It's not something that naturally develops in the HR space. I mean, even people analytics is a relatively new field. So, even if you have the talent in-house now, recruiting for it in the future is going to be difficult, and you could create a system that's not sustainable or maintainable. One of the biggest things that we run into is we don't have pipelines to deliver the insights. So we've got a couple predictive models that we've created that have degrees of accuracy that are good enough to be put out into the world, right? And to be operating in our systems. But there's no way to insert those outcomes into the natural workflows where end users can look at them. Kind of going back to the technical problems before, your HR systems aren't generally good receivers of this. And with HR being for most of your users, HR is going to be a subset of a thing that they deal with, right? Because your main audience is hiring managers and employees. And so trying to deliver insights to them in a third or sixth system that they have to go to just isn't something that's going to work. I mean, the other thing that can happen is then for that insight to be meaningful. So one of the predictive models that we built that has for jobs that we've seen before, it had, I want to say, a 96% accuracy, was estimating how long it would take us to fill the job, right? That's great. High degree of accuracy, would have felt good deploying that, but didn't have a way to get that information out to recruiters, hiring managers, HR business partners. And if we did, we had to think about, okay, what value is that actually creating? It's, in some cases, that's actually creating more of a dangerous expectation that doesn't conform to the reality of what's going on the ground for that user. So some of those very practical difficulties, and then I think, not having balanced data. So another reason that vendors are so much better at HR AI is look at trying to evaluate candidates. Well, if you build an internal AI to evaluate candidates, the most that you can ever do is look at who has already been successful with your organization. And so what you can do is create a very biased and unfortunate model that's kind of making all these decisions that you don't want it to be making. And so vendors have more ability to pull from different employers and create a more holistic and a more fair picture. And so those are just a couple of the reasons that we have gone with a vendor-led approach in terms of our HR AI. Now, that being said, there are a number of advantages. If you can find good partners, there are a number of advantages that can come from using that kind of AI, like faster hiring of better candidates, lowering your turnover, and inversely increasing retention and engagement and things like that. So there definitely are benefits, but it's very much a space where I highly recommend being an integrator and an owner rather than a developer.
What excites you the most about HR, data analytics? Because I can feel the energy from your last answer.
Yeah, I do. I love it. It is the most fun data type that I've worked with so far. aside from geographic data, because that's just a special nerdy kind of fun for me that I don't understand. I think going back to what I was saying before about what's different about it, I think there is inherent meaning in working with HR data, right? You are affecting people's lives, their livelihood in terms of how they get their money, their experience of that, because people spend a significant amount of time at work. And so everything that we do is kind of directly contributing to that picture of how do we treat our people well? How do we craft policies that better enable and empower and take care of our people that make up our workforce? I think that's one of the reasons, probably the main reason that I love it. Also, it's kind of going back to what I said before about the relatively low slope in terms of demand, or the easy slope in terms of demand. It can be easy to show up and provide value. I remember at an organization that I joined, we were looking at an HR number at one point, and I'd ask a question that I thought was going to be relatively easy to answer, which is, okay, this number is here. Is this number good or bad? And in the room of 10 other people, nobody knew the answer to that question. So it's like, all right, I can deliver value to this organization pretty quickly.
Yeah. With just a question. That's right.
Yep.
Wow. So for those that are listening, how can they reach out to you?
Yeah, I am on LinkedIn. I believe my slash is Zach L. Frank, I'm going to say. And also, I'm on Twitter, although I don't Twitter a lot. I'm more of a lurker on Twitter, Zach the Frank, at Zach the Frank. Those are two pretty good ways to get a hold of me.
That sounds great. Well, for more information on the data standard, you can find us at www.datastandard.io. This episode was also sponsored by Pandio, and they're innovating the tech space. You can learn more about their work at pandio.com. But Zach, thank you again for being here, and it was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thanks, Shanna.